The challenge to Sally Morgan this morning, as well as being backed up by respected science writers and professors such as Simon and Chris here, is being issued by the Merseyside Skeptics Society, represented here today by myself and by the President, Mike Hall. We're a non-profit grassroots group which came together in Liverpool in February 2009 because we felt it was important that extraordinary claims be critiqued and that evidence supporting fringe ideas should be presented and examined before people should be encouraged to believe in them, and certainly long before people should be expected to part with their money for them. Besides offering a sense of community to the region's rationalist population, we see our role as offering a voice of reason in areas where little reason appears to be prevailing, this Halloween challenge being just one example. Another example, we recently ran a large-scale campaign protesting against the use of homeopathy on the NHS and all around the world, something which ran actually in every continent of the world, in more than 70 cities in 30 countries, all headed up by us, small group here in Liverpool. So we tend to try and engage ourselves in some activism to try and sort of question claims that are out there. Our challenge to Sally Morgan isn't the first time we've been involved in appealing to a self-claimed psychic to demonstrate that their talents are real. And while Sally hasn't turned up today so far, it's fair to say she's received this challenge in better spirits than the local psychic Joe Power did 2 years ago when we presented him with the opportunity to put the claims he makes to the test. It's fair to say Mr. Power didn't take that invitation up either, and we'll leave that there. That said, the fact that Sally has decided that, in her own words, or at least in the words of her lawyers, that she has far more important things to do than to take part in this or in any other test at this point, is a great shame. This morning we offered a very real, very genuine opportunity for Sally to demonstrate to us not only that the powers she claims to have are real, but even that such powers can genuinely exist. Never in the history of humanity has anyone demonstrated that psychic abilities are real under conditions in which a magician or somebody wishing to cheat couldn't appear to be successful. Had Sally chosen to attend today and been successful, she could well have made history, as we've already mentioned. She could also have silenced some critics and made a number of people appear quite foolish to boot. I imagine it would have been well worth an hour of her time had she been successful. It's also worth reiterating that if Sally had felt the test we'd proposed, which was based precisely on the skills she demonstrates in her theatre shows, or as close as possible as we could get to that, if she'd felt that wasn't a fair test in any way, we'd appeal to her to attend and explain to us why. Our aim was to devise a test which, as accurately as possible, matched the reading Sally does for a living. So it's a shame that this opportunity has passed by. We're here today because, unlike Sally, we don't feel that there are far more important things to do than to take part in such tests. In fact, we feel that where psychic abilities are concerned, such tests are crucially important. Putting extraordinary and unprovable claims, or unproven claims rather, to a simple, fair test helps us determine truth from illusion. In fact, it's the only reliable way to determine what's genuine and what isn't, as free from any biases as possible. To use an analogy and to reiterate a point Mike made earlier, if a man were to claim to be able to fly unaided, it would be unreasonable to take him at his word. Instead, the reasonable act would be to request a demonstration of his ability. More reasonable still would be to check his flight for supporting ropes and mechanical aids. Before accepting a notion which requires you to overturn your entire worldview, it's best to check that that notion is in fact true. With this in mind, we'd like to announce that although today's test of psychic talents hasn't gone ahead so far, we're undeterred. Instead, we, by which I mean the Merseyside Skeptics Society, Simon Singh, Chris French, we'd like to extend this challenge into the future. Each Halloween, we intend to offer the opportunity for someone who professes to have supernatural or paranormal talents to demonstrate their abilities under controlled but fair conditions, just as we've offered today. As with today's proposed test for Sally, the design of the experiment will be based closely around the skill the subject claims to possess. And as with Sally's challenge, there'll be an opportunity for the subject to collaborate with us to design a fair test which they're happy to take part in before we begin. More details will be announced in due course, but for now, we're happy to be able to offer the Halloween challenge for next year and going forward.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Marshall or indeed for anybody?
Yeah, you say you started the Skeptics Society in 2009.
I think that's right.
Yeah, basically, you know, just say, well, are these claims for real before people waste their money? What I get told, and I hear about people talking about skepticism, they say, oh, they're just dull and boring and take all the magic out of life. What do you say in response to that statement?
Well, I think there's far more magic in actually understanding how the world genuinely is than in persisting in an illusion without necessarily testing whether that illusion is true. I think, as we've said many times in the past, there are two ways to approach, we want to be as right as possible. and we can either try and bend reality to what we believe or change what we believe to fit with reality, and the latter turns out to be much easier to do. So while some claims and some ideas might be comforting, I actually would rather try and understand as much as possible how the world genuinely works and to inquire. And I'm sure the scientists professionally sat here on the panel would probably be able to agree and probably elaborate further.
I mean, I think the example I tend to use is, I think Richard Dawkins talked about it in his book Unweaving the Rainbow, where I think Keats wrote a poem in which he almost had a go at science, the way that Newton was unweaving this beautiful natural object and taking it apart and taking away the poetry and the magic and the wonder. And what Richard Dawkins says, and many others, Richard Feynman and so on, is that the rainbow is still there, the rainbow is still beautiful. But when you understand what each raindrop is doing, what each raindrop is contributing, when you realise what each ray of the sun is contributing, that only enriches the beauty. So I think science and skepticism and rationalism is a hugely positive thing. When we push to one side the things that aren't real, we can then focus on the true wonder of those things that are genuine.
And just on the point of skeptics being boring, well, very idea. I mean, if you've ever been to a skeptics conference, or as I know you go to the skeptics in the pub talks, I mean, there's actually generally extremely entertaining. I mean, the number of comedians that have lent their support to this particular campaign and other kinds of entertainers is an illustration of that. I mean, you've got some fantastic people like Dara O'Brien, Tim Minchin, you know, there's a whole Robin Ince, there's a whole range of people out there. And I would just recommend going along to the skeptics in the pub talks. I don't think for 1 minute you'll find that they're kind of boring events. They're usually kind of very interesting and also full of a lot of laughter. So yeah, definitely reject that idea.
Are there any other questions for anybody at all?
But we could test that idea. We could have a pub room with skeptics in the pub going on, an empty room next door where nothing's going on.
Funny you should say that. Next Tuesday evening, Merseyside Skeptics Association is having a talk upstairs in a pub about moon landing.
I saw this, yes. This looked really interesting. I think we'll actually pop along to that.
So Steve Barrett from the Physics Department is talking about moon landing hoaxes. Ship might at 7:30.
Are you going to spoil the ending and tell us whether it's
real?
It's real.
So come and have a decent time to talk about science.
Okay, well, I think we're going to leave it there, everybody. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, especially those of you who went to the trouble of getting photographs of your deceased loved ones to take part in the test. I'm sorry that we haven't used them, but they are carefully sealed away in our case there, and we may be able to use them in a future test. But aside from that, thank you very much for coming, everybody, and we'll see you soon, I hope.